Is it time? Should we just go? Who the fuck is gonna stop us is my question. Okay, so I am Mariko Tamaki, and this is Superheroes Wear Tights. And we're probably going to talk about making out, but we're not actually going to make out in this panel, and it's going to be super amazing, and I'm really excited. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our fabulous presenters to introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk about superheroes. And so the way this is going to work is if you have a question as opposed to a statement. Statements have to come after the panel. Questions can come during the panel. If you lock eyes with me and raise your hand in this way, like, I will call on you, and then you can add your question to my questions. So we're going to get this show started, and we're going to start with Rachel. Rachel, would you introduce yourself? Rachel Pollack, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm Rachel Pollack. I've written a lot of prose, but I've also written comics. Most notably, probably Doom Patrol in the early 90s and a few other things around that time.
Yeah!
Yes,
Mostly out here.
I just saw that picture recently of the Laughing Game, and I remembered how part of it was inspired by the movie The Crying Game, in which there's a trans character who's a sad character. She's a strong character, but, it's just automatically assumed her life is sad. So part of what I was doing was the idea of, having a trans person whose life is laughing rather than sad. And I've done other works, and I'm very interested in the subject of queerness and superheroes, because I've been thinking about this recently, and actually, your book really dovetails in some of what I was going to say, the title, The New Mutants, because I realized that superheroes are by definition queer. This is because they have a secret identity, which, in the old days, certainly, most queer people had, before gay liberation. And even today, many, queer people have a secret identity in the workplace and things like that. But also that they were, just fantastic and wonderful when they had the real identity, when they shed their, fake identity. But the other thing about it was the realization that, they have to come out of the closet to be superheroes. And it's queer because it's different than ordinary human beings. And The New Mutants crystallizes for me a long time ago in the story. At that time, people assumed that the subtext of the X-Men, and therefore the New Mutants, was race. Racial prejudice, And this was the assumption that was being made. And then there was a story in which a high school mutant has committed suicide. And Kitty Pryde, one of the New Mutants, name Pride should have been a clue. She goes and speaks to the student, and she outs herself as a mutant. And I realized that the difference between racial issues and queer issues is that whatever race you are, or religion, or whatever, you're the same as your parents usually. In most cases, there's a case of adoption, or whatever. But you have that continuity, and you're part of that world. Whereas if you're queer, you're often not the same as your parents. And also, mutants become mutants as adolescents. And for some people, they're queer all their lives, they know it all their lives. Other people don't really know it till they get desire. And it's the wrong desire. And in the story, what was clear was what happened to this character was that, all his life, he'd been part of us against them being the mutants, And then suddenly he discovers he's a mutant, and he's no longer part of us. He's one of them, and he can't stand it, and he kills himself. And I thought of, a lot of, queer suicides. It's that same thing. They discovered they're actually part of this group they despised and made fun of all their lives, And I say, obviously many people are queer from their first moments, and they always know it, But they still have to come out. So, the whole thing of superheroes, and the fact that superheroes are just magical and wonderful, was a meaningful thing to me, And the idea that, because to me, one of the big issues in my life and in my writing was to claim transsexuality, as we called it in the early 70s, and then onwards for a while, to claim it as, an identity that's powerful and magical, and, something that's just really great. Because the thing that most of us were struggling with, in those early days was shame. We were taught to be ashamed of ourselves because we were weird and we were perverted and we were, bizarre and strange and also pitiful. And pity was another thing, And I started doing research into kind of shamanic histories, and things like that, and prehistoric things, and finding in ancient religion, and mythology, and just finding that, trans people were everywhere, and trans practices, and trans, priests and priestesses and goddesses and so on. But it was, just covered up.
Right.
So that this modern medical narrative had pretended to come out of nowhere. And many trans people thought that they were, in fact, actually, some modern kind of thing, because it had only been talked about in modern times by doctors, And I realized that, the way you get over shame and self-pity and things that destroy you are not to say, I will no longer feel ashamed of myself. It's to find something that's more powerful.
Right.
And the more powerful thing was, ancient goddess magic, sex-changing, queer, gay, lesbian, whatever it is, to find that that has roots, all the way back in humanity and was always seen as power,
I just want us to introduce, and then we can go, because this is such juicy stuff, and I really want us to talk about. Yes, no, for sure. I really want to get into talking about that. So I want us to get through our introduction so that we can talk about that more, because I really want to hear what you have to say about it. But I feel like if we all know the players, then we can all talk about it more, and it'll be even more awesome.
Wow, that's cool.
So Sina, can I get you to do your 2 cents about who you are?
Yeah. My name is Sina Grace. That M is cool, but my Gmail does that. Anyway, hi, nice to see you. I write and draw comics, and I have mainly been an Image Comics dude, but this June I will be a little bit more on the Marvel side of things with this book, Iceman. And for people who don't know, he became gay. There's a time-displaced version of himself who's a teenager. And basically, Jean Grey, who's also time displaced, I know, X-Men logic. She's like, "Yo, bro, I read your mind. You're gay." And then they were like, so he's like, "Oh, cool." And then he's like, "Wait a minute." And then they go to his older version, and they're like, "If he's gay, you're gay." And then it's and Brian Michael Bendis, I think some people disagree, but I kind of liked how they handled that retcon. And he basically said, it was really hard to be one thing and to fight for one thing every day of my life and be, to the mutant metaphor, so to speak. Like, he's already kind of challenging so many things every day, both literally, figuratively, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, I was just exhausted and didn't want to deal with the other thing, which was my sexuality. And I've been leaning into that metaphor because I don't know how many people here, where we're all at with our identities and stuff, but it takes time to figure out who you are. And some people need more time than others. And I've just been sort of treating Bobby Drake like that, where, it's just easy to hide behind jokes. I've done that. It's very easy to compartmentalize and make a cute little aside, and people laugh and forget about you. And so that's how I've been treating the character. And in June, the internet will either like it or hate it or both, and that'll be fine.
And you'll know immediately?
Yeah, I'll know immediately. And then the next slide, I do a lot of memoir, and this is a page from my book, now a major motion web series called Self-Obsessed. And it's just all about being attracted to bears and sort of the reality and also the manga dream of it. And then I did an Image book called Burn the Orphanage, and there is a character named Bear, who is a bear. And you see a lot of exploitation, stripper ninjas, and I play into it. It's not, I know that's bad. The comic book is all about subverting tropes. Anyway, and that's him getting a burrito from a really cute guy named Nick. And his phone number's on the burrito, 555-555. So yeah, I always, I just basically take what I'm interested in and put it into books that I do. And I'm really lucky to be supported by the industry right now. And oh, and then this is a page from Iceman. The book basically asks the question, describe yourself in 500 words or less. And he goes, hey guys, on this dating profile. Can I say one cute thing and then I'll take it? So
you can always say one cute thing. Anybody can always say one cute thing.
I've got a cute thing to say about this. So in the script, a lot of people the 3 people who know me here know that I love Sex and the City. And I wanted to kind of poke fun at myself by starting it with him being very Carrie Bradshaw, and like everyone's like, oh God, here's Cena just being Cena in this Marvel book. But then my artist took it even further, because I said in the queue, I was like, oh, have it look like Carrie Bradshaw typing on her computer. And he was like, hello, Cena, I also added all of these shoes like Carrie Bradshaw. Bobby Drake loves shoes, just like her. And I freaking love it, because he's into sneaks. He's into cool sneaks. And then this week we decided, kind of drinking, celebrating queers in comics, that if I get to do a costume redesign, I'm going to tell Kevin Wada, like, give him some cool sneaks.
Yes.
Right? Iceman and cool sneaks. Yeah. Yes. And then we can do a co-brand with like Adidas, and I can get free shoes. And so apparently I've sold out with the queer agenda. But anyway, so yeah, I try to have fun with it. But that's me. Hi.
All right. Okay.
Hey, everybody. So I'm Ramsey Fawaz. I am an assistant professor of English at UW-Madison. So I wrote this little book called The New Mutants, Superheroes and the Radical Imagination of American Comics. And it's basically a cultural history of the transformation of the American superhero into a mutant and a social and species outcast after World War II. And the book tracks like the variety of ways in which superhero comic books took up a lot of the visual culture and the visual imagination of radical left-wing social movements like Black Power, women's and gay liberation, and civil rights throughout this period. So this is the first comic book I ever read, the 35th anniversary of the X-Men. And if you move forward, this. Oh, see, I actually love that issue. We can have this fight in a minute. But I remember feeling incredible identification with this character, with the character Storm, which is a form of identification a lot of us have for this character. And if you go forward one more, there's me as a little kid identifying with somebody who was so radically unlike me. And when I became a scholar, I became really interested in what it was about the X-Men comics that lent themselves to allowing readers from so many different locations and identities to cross-gender identify, to cross-racially identify with so many characters. I wanted to know how they accomplished this. So basically, I tracked this back when I became a cultural historian to the 60s and the 70s. And I talked about this a little yesterday. I began to track kind of the variety of ways in which the transformation of the superhero into a mutant allowed for all of these new forms of sociality between kind of outcast figures. So I tracked it back to kind of this monstrous mutant family formation of the Fantastic Four. If you go forward, I have their deep alliances with characters of color, with people from around the world and all throughout the cosmos. You could just flip through this. So, and quite extensively talk about the way in which the X-Men really centered around the idea of alternative family formations and kinship. So you see in their advertising and the psychedelic cultures of the 60s, gay liberation. I argue that the comic book is borrowing from disco culture, from gay culture, in all of these really complex ways that readers knew and understood. So the last thing I'll say is that the book is really not about LGBTQ representation. It's not about where do we see characters who are gay or lesbian. It's about how kind of the core ethics of queer life wove its way through superhero comic books in the 60s and after, whether or not characters were identified as queer. And that really intrigues me. And I find that really powerful.
That fucking intrigues me too.
Yeah.
Can anyone tongue click? Can someone do that?
Tongue pop?
Oh, they can.
I can't. I can't even snap. Yeah, that's how bad at gay I am. Okay, I'm just gonna flip. Okay, so just so that no, I got my own mic. So I'm Mariko Tamaki. I am most well known for writing graphic novels with my cousin Jillian Tamaki, which include homosexuals, which have recently been banned for including homosexuals. But my interest in this is that I'm currently writing superhero comics, and currently writing superhero comics mostly about straight people. And really, this is like I'm like a new to comics person. Like I wasn't somebody who was like I've never like had like a. I never had, although I sexually fantasized about Wonder Woman intensely as a young person, obviously. Let's just say that that's a given.
Like she's your type, you like
Oh my God, I was so into her, and I was always like chasing her and her invisible plane as a child.
You need to write about that.
I will eventually, exactly. But so I have been obviously spending a lot of my time writing superhero comics about straight people, and then populating the sides, like all the peripheries, with homosexuals, including Dolly, who is one of Supergirl's best friends, who's like my favorite lesbian I've ever written. Yes, but I haven't ever written a gay superhero, which I'm super jealous that Cena gets to write a gay superhero. I have written the super gay assistant to Jennifer Walters and Hulk, who is Bradley. And I'm actually really curious for us to talk about what it means to kind of have these side characters who are queer, the sort of like gay best friend trope of like the sort of the extra gay person in a comic, and how that works and how we feel about it. I feel like the most gay thing I'm doing right now is I'm writing Adventure Time, and I'm currently writing a sequence on the Best Princess Ever competition, in which all of the princesses compete to be the best princess ever, which is obviously, a deconstruction of the feminine. Pardon? Yeah, well, I mean, it's like my version of like, I rewatched all of America's Next Top Model and then wrote this comic book series. So I feel like for me, like the queerest thing I do is to take straight things in comics and then kind of mess with them. Like that's my version of being a queer comic book writer. Blank. So what I wanted to start with was I wanted to ask, obviously we know that you and Storm have this connection. But maybe all of us could just set up like our specific kinks and talk about if you had like a first queer superhero love, who your first queer superhero crush would have been, and whether or not it was like that you thought that character seemed queer, or you just were just like, I'm into this person.
Oh, I can start, right?
Yeah, just go.
I just realized why. I've always been into Logan, Wolverine, and it's not because of what he looks like. It's actually because of how he feels for Jean Grey, and it's that and I'm like, oh, that's why, and that's why that's what I look for in dating too. But like, he just sees how special she is and thinks that like you have to deserve like the Phoenix, you know what I mean? Like she's just so amazing and would do anything for her, and he always does. He always like suffers and struggles and fights for her, even though he knows he's never gonna get her. And I've just always been drawn to that. I even like that shitty X-Men movie, the third one.
Oh my God, that's my favorite X-Men movie.
But it's not. But it's not good. But it's all just basically like Logan and Jean porn. Like
we're just gonna disagree this whole panel.
But respectfully.
Respectfully.
So that's I've always emotionally loved a man so tortured with a deep, dark past who won't talk about it, but he'll still kind of like grab me hard and kiss me. Anyone?
And every time the claws come out, it hurts.
He's like always in pain.
I know, I love that too. Rachel, do you have like a favorite?
Sure.
Your first queer
So
superhero
I'm
crush?
old enough that I was lucky enough as a little kid to have read some of the last Captain Marvels before they were put out of business by DC. And I just thought that, I loved all of them. I just had this tremendous identification with them without, there was no consciousness about it. There was nothing I was formulating. I just loved them. And Captain Marvel Jr. particularly, because he was so gorgeous. And then I found out that Elvis Presley modeled his hairdo on Captain Marvel Jr., which I thought was very, very cool. And I remember as a kid, but it was this really weird thing because, he looked different in his own comic than he looked in the Marvel family. And I couldn't figure that out. Because it was like comics were not made by people, they were just there.
Right.
So how could this one person be different? But definitely his own comic is the one I was in love with because he was just so gorgeous. But like I said, it was not anything conscious. It was not a romantic. It was romantic, but I didn't formulate it that way. So I was, very young. But that was a great character. And then Storm also was a character I thought was very hot, but also identified with. And I had a very strong sense that Claremont had meant her to come out and be a lesbian with the ballet dancer, the ballet teacher, and that Marvel stopped him. I have no knowledge of this, no documentation of this whatsoever.
Fair enough.
I just had that strong sense, and that he lost interest after that, because that's what he wanted to do. But Storm was definitely a character that I considered really hot.
Do you have any other crushes that you want to share with us? Sorry, Ramsey, do you have any more crushes?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just want to say, I never crushed in the sense, I think I have a feeling we have similar tastes in men. But I never identified, like, looked at the men and thought, oh, I'm erotically attached to them. I was deeply attached to queer kinds of relationships between women characters. So I was enamored of the friendship between Jean Grey and Storm, which is so fully elaborated by Claremont over many years. And I remember a scene in the early, like in the late 70s Claremont, where they think that Phoenix has died, and this is when they first go to the Savage Land, when the X-Men go to the Savage Land. And there's this amazing moment when Storm goes up to Cyclops and she's like, I just want you to know, like, I know that you lost the love of your life, but she was also like my best friend and I feel your pain. And he says, I don't think I feel anything. She had become so different, like a different woman by becoming Phoenix, that like I didn't even recognize her. It's this amazing line that speaks to what you're saying, Rachel, because Claremont writes in her mouth, this character, she says, if that's what you think, then you never understood her, and what you wanted was to preserve her like a fly in amber. But she had gone from being a girl to a woman. And it's this amazing moment where she's just like, you're an idiot and you don't get what she was about, but like I do. And then there's this later really intense reconciliation between Jean and Storm, like, or a reunion. And that happens throughout the series, and I think the parallel to that in the New Mutants was Danny Moonstar and Ilyana, who I write about a lot in my book. And I think that these two sets of friendships were like Claremont's way of having a queer or potentially lesbian relationship between characters that was not actually lesbian. And that I was so drawn to that and continue to be like really drawn to that.
I feel like it's like the original, has anyone here read Anne of Green Gables? It's like the original bosom buddies, you know? It's like connecting to that thing. Like my friend actually did a show called Anne Made Me Gay, and we all talked about how we had sort of seen that friendship and queered right into it. Like all of us threw our lesbian lust into Anne and her best friend's relationship. But actually, what I want to also get back to is what you were talking about, Rachel, earlier, is how queer superheroes fit into and enhance the superhero story, and how what it means to be queer can contribute to, or you know, even how there's, I mean, I think it's clear in the mutant story, that kind of connection between queerness and being a mutant, but is there something that, even like politically today, that queerness contributes to the superhero story? Think on it, and then
well, like I said, I mean, to me, it's almost the same thing.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, to be queer, to be a mutant, you know, to be superheroes, it's all really the same, because there's this, you know, even if your transition is just, you know, by being bitten by a spider,
right,
and stuff like that, but it's to be other than humanity. And I think, you know, because culture, human culture, has been so structured on the binary heterosexual model, that to be queer is to be outside of humanity to some extent. And I think one reason that a lot of us maybe were drawn to superheroes, because lots of other people were drawn to superheroes, is we could see ourselves, if not consciously, we could see ourselves in some way in which we were reflected.
Oh, who do I have up there now? Green Lantern?
Yeah. Anyway.
I have Bombshells. I mostly have, I'll admit, you guys, there's so many lesbians in this PowerPoint, because that's...
Sorry, we're fighting already. Because he said he's into the same guys, and I'm like, no. I can't compete, you're cute. Blair and Serena up here, you know. This is not Gossip Girl Con. Anyway, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately with like the identity of queerness and superheroes is the notion of passing has been on my mind a lot. And especially because I think now everyone who is marginalized wants to band together, and but we also all have different things to gripe about and fight for. And you know, someone got in an argument with a friend of mine on Facebook last night because she is Latina and he is a gay man, and she was talking about this article that came out, like things we don't want to hear white people say to POCs. And he kept arguing with her as a gay man, and she was like, bro, you don't get it because you're white, you pass, like there's these experiences you're not privy to, and I respect both. I just look like kind of everyone's like, oh, I don't care what color you are. Like I'm the I don't care what color you are color, you know? So I know that there's a difference from my experience and others, but I've seen both sides of just being able to pass and then not pass, and I think queerness is something that people can internalize and can hide and can turn into the secret identity thing. And there's a lot. I don't have anything poignant to say. It's been on my mind, and I've been letting it kind of gestate and figuring out how to apply that to the stories I'm telling right now, because I think that is something we're all sort of working with and thinking about. And some of us, especially right now, are kind of like, well, maybe I don't want to be passing. Maybe I do want to be louder and prouder, like just to like let everyone know who can't hide that, like, hey, there's a bigger population than some people would like to say. Did you hear about that too?
About what?
Like, I think the White House is trying to change the official number of gay people. Like, they're like, oh, it's actually not 10%. It's like way lower. Did you know that? You're not real. Don't worry. Like, or something like, I don't know. That's not substantiated. Same with the Storm Chris Claremont thing. But someone told me that. Look it up while we're talking. Prove it.
This whole panel is Google it.
What's that?
They removed it as a census category.
It had never been part of a census. It was going to be included in the next census for the first time. Which is not better, or it's still horrible, but...
Googling is totally acceptable on this panel, by the way. Googling,
yeah.
Booing is not acceptable. If you're going to boo, get the fuck out. But if you can Google, you can totally Google, that's fine.
So something that I'm really interested in doing in my work is demythologizing the superhero. I'm not interested in saying that it's a figure that's universal in any way. It's very particular to a specific historical moment, and it does certain kinds of cultural work. And I think one thing that the American superhero has done in the 20th century is it magnetizes the problem of difference. Because exactly as Rachel was saying, you produce characters who are distinct from ordinary humanity, and then you keep producing endless multiplicities of differences. So it's like this one uses lightning, and this one controls fire, and this one, and then we become obsessed with taxonomizing them. Like even among mutants, there's like alpha and omega levels, and this and that, and Morlocks, and this group, and this group. And I think what's brilliant about that is that the superhero demands the negotiation of multiplicitous differences. Like when you get invested in the Marvel Universe, you have to deal with difference within difference within difference. And fans understood that. So like one thing I read about is that when Claremont introduced Storm, there was a young woman reader who wrote a letter to him and said, like in 1976, she's like, I'm fascinated not only that you introduced a black woman character, but that she's not American. And she said basically, I'm intrigued by the way in which like she doesn't identify with African Americans. Like she has a different experience of blackness. So what's interesting is that I think part of what happens when you add actual LGBT characters is that you have a real world difference now having to interact with a series of fictional differences, like mutant power and other kind of distinctions between mutants. And so in that sense, I actually think adding queerness more explicitly is just part and parcel of what has already been going on in superheroes. And I have to say, I mean, this is kind of like blasphemy, I'm not super invested in the representation of specific identities. So while I've been somewhat moved by the introduction of a lot of LGBT characters, I also, like Tony and I had this fight, Tony's sitting right there. When the Iceman thing happened, I actually really hated it. Because I felt like what they wanted to do was a developmental narrative, like, this is such a classic trope of being gay, where someone else is like, well, I knew before you did. I read your mind, and I know you're going to be that.
I'm from like, another time, and so I knew.
Like, and then what happens is that instead of producing two Bobbies, one that maybe isn't going to be gay, it's like, oh, now we're going to retcon it so that both versions of you are going to developmentally become one thing. And that seems actually very unqueer to me. But Tony has a good read on this, and I'm sure you do, that works against what I'm arguing. So,
Rachel, did you have something to say?
Yeah, there's some hands up.
Did you want to get into this first?
Yeah. One big moment for me in the realization of what was going on with comics and superheroes was an issue of Superboy, in which the town turns against Superboy for some obscure reason. And the cover of it, or the splash page, was people are stoning him. Get out of town, get out of town. And Ma and Pa Kent are stoning him as well. And they whisper to each other, we have to do this, otherwise people might realize that Superboy is Clark. Oh. And boy, did that hit me so hard, you know? That idea of like, you know, you have to be in the closet, you have to hide what you are, and your family will stone you also, you know, and they think they're protecting you by doing this, you know? So that was a really powerful thing, you know?
That's real Zack Snyder logic.
Holy smokes. Did you in the audience just have something you wanted to like hit us with your theory on this, or since you had so much of a theory yesterday, do you want to share it with us?
My theory is the closet happens, Ramsey Fawaz, and people come out of it, and it's like the disjunction between straight Bobby and gay Bobby is supposed to sort of like the feeling of when you come out to someone and that person goes, wait, were you lying to me the whole time? Like, I don't believe this. Like that moment of disjunction between fans, I think that was very important. And it had something to do with like the way that people react to coming out of the closet. And anyone who, like the 90s Bobby was clearly a homosexual. Right? Like they were clearly saying like this dude's in the closet and everyone's waiting for him to come out.
Well, it's like the X-Men movie where Bobby is like talking to his parents about, and he like turns the tea into ice, and his parents are like, "I can't believe you did that." And it was like perfectly good tea. But it is that moment where you're like, that's a coming out scene being used to. That's like the mutant, the mutant version of a coming out scene. I am curious. So I do think I personally, see you, and we're gonna get to you next. But first I want to talk about this thing, and I have this mic, so I get to talk first. But I'm very curious about people's feelings about the coming out scene. I think I have. Do I have it? Like, so there is this thing where if you are a queer superhero, this is Batwoman. Yes, Batwoman, who later, just so we know that there's life beyond that, gets to do this sexy waltz with another lady, and they kind of hit on each other in this very lesbian way. But another part of the scene is this kind of coming out scene where you have someone who has to like share this information about their identity, and there's like an awkward moment, and it is a very powerful scene because it's someone standing up for themselves, and obviously that has like, metaphorical resonance. But I do think so. My issue that I come up against is I kind of feel like there's something about the scene that plays out the same way every time, that I almost am like loathe what I see that there's going to be. Like when I saw there was lesbian Batwoman, I was like, there's going to be a scene where she has to say to someone, well, I'm gay. And I don't want to read that scene. So I wondered what sort of other people's thoughts were about including the scene, and because I do feel it's something that publishers expect. Like it's sort of something that is, if you're going to have a gay character, I think every publisher's like, mentally sectioning off 2 pages for a coming out scene. And what you think about that?
Yeah, no, somebody was going to ask something.
Well, actually, I wanted to talk about this a bit because this also sort of irritated me, not only as someone who's queer, but also a Batman nerd. Because Batwoman's origin story is based upon her stalking Batman with her own female ward, and both of them just follow around Batman and Robin, and it's the 1940s, and that's somehow okay to represent a woman like that. Like, she's not a superhero by herself, she has to emulate Batman, and that was her origin. And then so when they brought her back, because she was gone from the DC series for such a long time, they brought her back in this way, and then kind of shifted to a different stereotype.
Right.
I was just like, the dynamic of that is really weird.
Well, let's first say that every time we read a superhero character, there's at least 40% of our brains that is dissatisfied with whatever an editor, a publisher, or a writer has decided to do, and then tweets about it. So that is obviously like part of anything. But I do think, so I am curious to hear if anybody else, maybe it's just me, maybe I'm just alone at my pedestal, annoyed with coming out scenes.
With the notion of the coming out.
With the notion of the coming out scene, do you think that we should, let's say I was all powerful, let's hypothetically say, and not as like in a superhero way, but in like a more of an academic way, and I banned the coming out scene for all time in comic books. Like, what are people's thoughts on that? Is there a value to it that still resonates today, or what are we thinking? Okay. Okay, Sina, and then you, and then you. Okay.
Yeah. I'll just go real fast. I think it's not like, I think it's troubled. Like, I think, we got to work on it and make it better. But the one thing I'm recognizing and realizing because, at Image Comics, you're kind of speaking to the converted. So, like, you're like, yeah, cool, born this way. But with Marvel, my editor has pointed out, he's like, you can't write for San Francisco, Los Angeles, or New York. You need to write for, like, Cleveland, Ohio, or
Topeka.
like... Yeah, like, somewhere in the middle, and then you realize you're like, oh, there's still so much work to be done and there's still so many people who are scared to go on this journey, and that's kind of how I see it. Why it still has to exist, even in its flawed manner, because there are people who will find it that way and find it in this sort of, again, not the best way, but it might do something for them because it's so blatant and blatantly poignant, you know, that they that they might feel safe to say, oh, that's me, you know, and it'll be their first time seeing it. That's all I have to say on it, is that, you know, sometimes it's flawed, and let's talk about the flaw and how to make it better.
Yes.
But it still feels necessary in some parts of the world and nation too.
Okay, so are you talking about the coming out scene, or you have an additional point?
Two that are related.
Okay.
Okay. In terms of the coming out scene, I feel like it's really going to depend on the audience that the comic is being made for, just because, like, if it's a story about somebody who's older and more comfortable in their life, like, the coming out scene may be less necessary because they can just catch the image and, like, yes, the person who I'm married to is my gender, or we're not married because marriage is a fake institution, but we live together, or whatever.
Complicated.
Yeah. But, like, if it's a comic aimed at younger people, you do need to remember, like, hey, this is maybe a thing that they're thinking about doing. And comics, I feel like, are really good at connecting with people because they're so good at just showing people's lives and, like, getting the reader to, like, see themselves in the film.
Sure. I mean, there is that value. I think that there is something to say for, you know, this is something that people are still doing, and to see superheroes doing it, there's some resonance to that. Like, there are still people who are coming out, obviously. So it is something it's nice to see your superhero, especially to see someone who is powerful, to see a reflection of that experience in a powerful person. I can totally see that. I guess the thing that I kind of come up against is it sort of also feels like the story over and over again is, I need to create, my identity is a coming out moment. And I think the thing that I struggle with is that idea that versus, I'm obviously a huge fan of Lumberjanes. Everybody knows this. But I think that the idea of having an environment where the status quo is, yeah, some of our friends are gay, nobody's coming out, they're just, you know, Mal and Molly smooch. Nobody's like, oh my God, we have to pull Mal and Molly aside over like a fire and talk to them about like their sexuality. It just is there. And I think that that's something that I can't even imagine seeing in a Marvel universe. I say this as someone who writes, yeah.
That is my favorite depiction of queerness, but I also just want to bring it back to Iceman and be like, the terrible film we were talking about earlier that had like the pseudo coming out scene.
Why do we have to say it as a terrible film? Don't say that. I'm going to cut you off if you keep calling it a terrible film. No, I can call it.
I remember laughing hysterically at that one scene where his parents asked him, have you tried not being a mutant?
Right.
And that to me was just like so quintessentially funny and such a coming out scene that like I had to pause the movie and just like laugh until I cried. So I do
Gay people everywhere paused that movie and were like, Iceman, you know. We all had that moment. Did you have something?
I think it would be great. People have coming out moments, have these moments where it's scary to come out to someone. But I mean, I would love to see scenes where someone says, you know, I'm gay, right? Yeah. And that's it, you know?
Yes.
And in the previous panel, we were talking about in trans characters and stuff, things we'd like to ban. I said I'd like to ban transition stories. Because it's that same trope of coming out, you know, of the agony of coming out.
Yes.
Know, the agony of the change. And then supposedly once you've done it, then you're great.
Yeah.
You know, but maybe you're great already. And, you know, and go into what's great about it being gay, what's great about being queer, rather than the agony of claiming being queer.
Right. I mean, I do think I have often said that I decided a long time ago I would never write a gay story where someone comes out as being gay and then cries about it. Even though I cried about it, I fucking cried endlessly about it, and that's also well documented. But I think, to me, the idea of that's the idea that the gay character coming into the straight world and pronouncing their gayness to the straight person, also, like, it's never two gay people being like, oh, we could potentially get it on because I'm gay and you're gay, that's awesome. It's, hello, straight person, I am gay, and I'm, you know, I guess Iceman coming out to himself is kind of a really great example of that.
Well, actually, maybe can I?
Yeah, sure.
Well, did I turn it off? No, it's on. Wait, say that again so I can remember what I was going to say, because I had another thing to say, but I wanted to say that too.
I think
I'm
that
just like you. You had 2 things to say. I have 2 things to say.
we're all avoiding the binary, you guys. We can just embrace multiple complexities. So what I was saying is the problem I have like with this scene is that it is very often the straight character is the person that the gay character comes out to, and it's the gay character explaining themselves to a straight character in a straight world and sort of distinguishing themselves as gay, as opposed to 2 gay people who like meet each other. Like I would love like Storm and Mystique to be like, "Are you gay too? So cool. What are you doing later?" You know, like I would love, that's never going to happen, but I would love that scene. I think it would be great.
Yeah, well, I guess, okay, so I can kind of make this all one big point instead of be weird and me. But yeah, and well, like with the Image Comics book, Burn the Orphanage, the character Bear, he never does come out. He just, at the end of the book, the very first one, everyone leaves the narrative with their respective sweeties. The main guy leaves with a girl who looks exactly like Sarah Jessica Parker, because I'm me, and then Bear walks away with his boyfriend, who is named Boy, who looks a lot like me, hops on his shoulders, and they walk away. But it's never stated, and then they have the love story that matters the most in the whole arc. But again, it's never like, oh, I'm gay. And with Bobby, it is a really, I love this metaphor of someone who like has lied to himself about something throughout his entire life, because it's so, I know so many people who've done it. I've dated guys who didn't come out till they were 31, and that's a story that's never been told. And like my editor keeps getting mad at me because I'm like, well, here's my idea for the love story, and he's like, you need to focus on the thing that like no one's ever done, which is like coming out like in your 30s or like late 20s. Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, Bobby's still kind of young and hot, but I mean, oh my God, you should see all my exes. Don't worry, I love people of all ages. But he's.
We have to make all this clear.
Yeah, I gotta stop talking. I gotta just foot in my mouth.
Anyway.
I think part of what we're talking about also is just the nature of cliche.
Yes.
So it's possible to say that, yes, like many gay people come out to straight people, the closet still exists, etc. But the question is whether or not we want to keep telling the story the same way. So like yesterday in the Q&A of a panel that Rachel was on, there was a dialogue or a debate about, you know, like, people are saying don't use food metaphors to describe African Americans and other people of color, and there was like a debate about about using this, and I was just like, how about like don't use it just because it's cliche, like just because you want to push the art form in a new direction, so you don't keep doing the same thing. So part of it is like not banning the coming out, but how do you narrate the experience of coming out in so many different specific ways? I think disability representation struggles with this constantly, because the idea that disabled people fantasize about overcoming their disability is a cliche, that it also does not forward disability politics in any way, and that keeps playing out. So I think that there are a variety of ways to tell the story, but the key problem is going to be this. If you are only invested in representing gay people on the page, but the ethos or the value system of the story that you're telling is not shaped by queer values, then it's just gonna be another representation. Like you're just gonna have another person saying, I'm gay, but the actual politics of the story and how they relate to people will be meaningless. It'll be another representation. And the comic that comes to mind that doesn't do that is Young Avengers, which I actually, both the original and the new version strikes me as this oddity in Marvel Comics, where you have these 2 gay male characters who don't really officially come out. They're just like boyfriends. And in the second series, which is really odd and like this pop cultural like meta commentary, their love for each other is actually a huge problem. Like it's playing on the idea that young gay guys fantasize about falling in love with someone when they're a teenager and then like being married to them forever. And the story is really about how like actually that might turn out really bad. Like their love might turn out to lead to the end of the universe. And it's not homophobic. It's like actually saying like maybe you shouldn't be so attached to traditional narratives of like romance and love and monogamy, etc. Like maybe there's all these other kinds of relationalities that are possible. So that is a book that has an ethos at its core that is queer, in addition to representing like LGBT characters. And I think that that's important. And somebody like Claremont had that ethos for this very long period of time with the X-Men.
I just want to say really quickly, I love how nerdy this panel is. I'm just like, I have like a small boner for how nerdy this panel is. I'm like fully tenting in my tent dress. I want to move, and then I'm clocking you all, and then but I do want to get to this thing, which is, I do think I'd love to get into the specificity of who do you think is doing queer characters well? Like, if you are directing somebody, you're like, okay, you want to see queerness done super amazingly. Here is where I'm going to direct you. Like what is, I mean, obviously we've already called out the Avengers, the Young Avengers, and who is driving you crazy? Do you guys, either of you, have other people that you think is doing it particularly well, or something that's driving you nuts? Audience, think about this as well. Nobody? Do you have someone? Okay, who's doing it well?
I think that Kat Blake in Super Cakes is doing it really well. And this is kind of what you guys were saying before in does there need to be like a coming out scene? And I love that she just pops you right in the middle of like their relationship, and they're making pancakes in the morning. And then like that's just where it starts off. And it doesn't even start off with them being superheroes. It just starts off with just like early morning
making pancakes. Right. Yes?
I would have to say Steven Universe is the queerest thing ever, and it's fabulous.
Right. I mean, I really think the one thing that I'm noticing is that it's not just about queer characters, but it's like, as you were saying earlier, it's about queering, right? It's about sort of taking things that everybody sort of takes for granted in the characters that are just sort of upsetting the universe a little bit and just making things a little more, Steven Universe is a great example, just making things a little more flexible, like rather than having, I do feel like there's this kind of ABC, afternoon special type thing, which can happen sometimes. And it always sort of pleases me when that doesn't happen. Actually, another one that I'm just going to mention I just locked this thing. Wait. Oh, no, it unlocks. So has anyone read this? This is Beauty.
I've only read one issue. It's
such an interesting comic, and it's interesting because it's a comic that in and of itself, because it's about this drug called beauty that makes people beautiful. And there is this trans character in it, and it's probably one of my favorite scenes because rather than having this big, coming out scene, there's just this really great scene where she just talks about being beautiful, like looking in the mirror and seeing that she's beautiful and having this like moment. And then that's really it. Then she talks about her origin story, which touches on, obviously bullying and things of that nature, but it is like just about, it's one of my favorite things where the landscape itself is being queered because it's sort of undermining the sort of heteronormative, which really that's our job as queer people, is to undermine that stuff. Why are we here? If not to do that, but also to sort of tell very personal stories. And it's one of the, I actually went to Fantastic Comics and I was like, pull me all your gays, bring all the queers out and put it in a huge stack. And this is one of the comics that they gave me because this woman, Juliet, who's super great and works there.
Juliet Capra?
Yeah. She's awesome. Let's all like tweet her and say that I mentioned her today because she's awesome. And yeah, she pulled this comic and I was really surprised because there are so many other things where it's just like periodically a character will say like, I'm bisexual. No, I'm going to the store. And this was one of the few things where I was like, this is like the whole package. This is a real personal story and it's a story that's undermining of stuff that I hate, and also it has a really great character in it. So that's my example of someone who's doing it really well.
I have you need to talk, Jeremy. But I'm going to talk first because I got the mic and she taught me to do that.
We're really keeping the striations here, really keeping that alive.
This is like a weird example because obviously Alan Heinberg is a great go-to because he knows how to tell pop fiction and then also sneak in some good ideologies. But you know who I think is kind of tight is like Grant Morrison. He'll just sort of drop reads on very, very large platforms. And because he doesn't have to answer to any bureaucracy, he can kind of say what he wants with no repercussion. And so he in Playboy did that crazy Batman and Robin read, and the internet was really, really upset with him, but he's like, come on, everyone. And then he did that with Beast for a minute. He tried to make Beast gay, remember? Sorta, he did this, he would keep dropping these things that Beast was gay in his new X-Men stuff. And it never took because, he was the only one who thought that. But That's a weird example. I do like when straight people get it right. I don't know if he identifies as straight or not, but
That's the name of my new book, When Straight People Get It Right.
BuzzFeed, 5 times straight people did okay. And then was it Warren Ellis or Mark Miller who like officially made Midnighter and Apollo gay? Because I like that was actually matter-of-factly, like there was no coming out scene. I think they finished saving the world and kissed each other. Warren Ellis, so he's okay by us. Never mind the fact that he can write the shit out of a comic. He can out the shit out of a gay couple too.
Rachel, do you have an example? Oh.
Well, I'm sort of a Doom Patrol chauvinist. I mean, I love Grant Morrison. Grant Morrison inspired me, and then I was being queer. And then there's a new version of it, written by Gerard
Yes,
Way,
which is great.
Which is just great.
I love it.
And I love the way he took up, Morrison's idea of a transvestite street, Danny the Street, which is actually a British joke, because there's this famous drag performer named Danny LaRue. But he took it literally, made it a street. But now in Gerard's version of Doom Patrol is like there's Danny the comic, Danny the world, So Danny the Street's become this major queer character, a queer street. And it's such a great idea.
It is. All right, who in the audience had a fave? Okay, Zan, you have to go first because you had your hand up earlier and I didn't call on you. Sorry about that.
So it's kind of a general comment. My favorites are usually the things that are over there across the hall, because primarily indie stuff, like things that are in the bookstore where they met. I drifted away. I grew up on the not grew up, like my tween and teen years was all Marvel DC Comics. Was voraciously devouring all of the analogs for queerness, the Claremonts and the Morrisons and all that stuff. And when I discovered that there was actually queer indie comics, and I was coming out and I was out, then I realized that my tastes have matured and I wanted something really complicated. And I didn't want the coming out story again and again and again. I didn't want the gay bashing again and again and again. I didn't want the gays in the straight world again and again. So I reached this point where people always ask me, because I'm visible in queer comic circles, they ask me, so are you excited about, the transgender supporting character in the Batwoman, Batgirl? And I'm like, yay! It's not at all demeaning superheroes. It's just that I've learned to know ahead of time that my odds are low. That I can be satisfied, like you were saying, 40% of it's bad, and then
I said that 40% of your brain knows it's bad.
Right.
I didn't say 40% of it's bad. Don't quote me on that.
But the idea that there are few and far between writers and artists who are dealing with it from a core place, and so you get the broad strokes, but you don't get the real deep nuances of it, and that's the stuff that I'm always mad for. So I find that the best books that I like are not necessarily, like the intersection of the best books and the queer books, it's not usually very close.
Right.
Unless you get to the indies, where the whole point is to tell very specific, very individual stories that are really complicated and messy, and don't hand it to you because you have to worry that you're sending the wrong message to a kid in Pocatello, Idaho.
Right. Good for knowing Pocatello, Idaho, though.
You don't want to send the wrong message. Like with the coming out story, you don't, like I kind of loved the Jean Grey outing of Iceman because it was so bad. Like she thought, oh, like I can see inside his head, I can see in everybody's head. I know it's not a bad thing. I kind of know where he's coming from, so I'll just tell him and he'll feel cool with it. And it was maybe a really, I mean, it was a kind of clumsy best friend kind of choice, but it was very awkward. And I really wanted them to follow it up with, that was a bad way to do this. But I wanted it to be a bad way to do it in the story, because that's much more interesting.
But if Jean Grey is psychic, she knows everybody's thinking like, fuck you, Jean Grey.
It can be really harmful to people for whom this is their first exposure to this kind of
Sure. Can you give a shout out to a specific non-major publisher comic that's doing it really well, so that we can... Quick gay stuff.
I was going to find her because she's Carlos McNeil. It's core and not core at the same time, because you have this queerness in her world. Like you have these whole clans of people who all look like these beautiful blonde women, whether they're male or female.
Right.
And it's this completely alien cultural way of growing up. And And then there's also like the actual queer characters that are just dropped into the story very incidentally, and it's never they're gay, like it's never that. It's never that. But it's also all in service of explorations of what it means to be a sexual being, what it means to be a man or a woman, or not, or a man or a woman.
Sure.
And I find that fascinating. So it's good sci-fi because it's actually very ambitious.
Yes. I like a specific recommendation. That's why we're all here to buy books. So I'll give a specific recommendation. Actually, I'm curious. So I'm curious about your experience because I think so. I was on a panel recently in Ottawa, so none of you were there. But we were talking about like why aren't there more like bisexual characters, or why aren't there more poly characters? And there were these sort of people, and they were sort of imagining this like fake pitching table where all the Marvel people were like, we won't make any bi characters. And I was like, it doesn't actually work like that. Like you actually have this writing pitching process where it's a very complex negotiation of like how you get those characters in there. So I was wondering if those of you who have pitched to publishers can talk about your experience pitching queer storylines to publishers and how that's gone and how it's maybe affected the story you end up telling.
May I? The nice thing for where I'm at is it's all about just kind of like instead of oh, that's a bad idea, which cool, like I've never gotten that. I get a lot of well, we're doing something with that character,
right?
like Bobby Drake just can't date some people because they're like arced out for like 2 years and I can't touch them,
right?
So, but that's really funny, because they have summits and they don't invite me, and so then they come up with their plans, and I'm like, well, how about this? And they're like, nope. Like I wanted to have, never mind. But at any rate, yeah, no, it's interesting because I always just try to, I don't want to. I like to look within the well and see what exists and what's already there. And I have an idea that I'm not going to bring up because no one's brought it up to me yet, and I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to actually surprise like people who like really like know their Marvel Universe stuff, and I'm like, I might actually do something cool. So I can't say much, but what I'm trying to say is I've been met with open minds, and for me, I personally like to look at where they've already either dropped hints or explicitly said if someone is queer for all intents and purposes. Because anyway, that's all I'll say. Because
you can't say anything because you're. Rachel, do you have your experience with pitching?
Not entirely, because I don't remember like ever saying, okay, now I'm going to make this character queer, And since I was working for Vertigo, people were very open to things. So things just evolved, I didn't have to fight about things.
So you just put it in the script and then there it was.
And, my trans character, Kate, was introduced in the same story, had this villain called Codpiece. And that was the big issue, this ridiculous villain, And that was, what people were upset about or excited about. Most people were upset about it. So there was that question. So I sort of snuck the queer character in there, as part of this other big story. It was kind of interesting. And then, other things that I did, like I did New Gods for a year. So it was a kind of standard group of characters. And there were characters that I would have moved more towards being queer if I had longer to work on it.
Right.
So it's interesting because sometimes I think that, you establish something and then you move something into it.
Right.
Rather than saying, hi, publisher, I want to do this queer story.
Right. I mean, I found that it's like a question of character. Like when I did DC Comics, I said to them, well, I want one of the best friends to be like a super dyke. And they were sort of like, you mean like a lesbian? I was like, no, more like a super dyke, like a dyke. But I think that it is a nuance of script because it really is in the moment as you're kind of creating, like at the best of times, you have like 24 pages and you're able to find in that some sort of scene that gets to something beyond just like, this thing is going to blow up and then they have to go over there and then this thing is going to blow up. So it is kind of hard to work those things in. But so I find it's funny because whenever I read comics and I see a queer bit, you see a line and you're like, I bet you that person was like, I'm going to put this line in here. This is going to be amazing. Because that's their mini victory. Yeah, I know. It's like with Hulk, I was like, well, there's not a lot of room for like a discussion of sexuality, but I was just like, well, they have 5 seconds in the elevator. I'll just put it in here. Like they'll just have like a nice gay elevator ride, and that's how it's gonna.
One quick comment.
Yeah.
The mention of polyamory is interesting because it strikes me that's I don't think I've ever seen that in comics.
Right.
And I think that's so it's that's more taboo than being queer.
Yeah.
Is to not be monogamous.
Sure.
And I think that I'd love to see that represented in comics again, but not as this agony.
Right.
But as this ordinary thing, Yeah. Here's a superhero who has this partner and this other partner.
Right.
And they've worked it out. And
Yeah.
and they're serious about it. They're committed to it. I think that would be great.
It would be great, yeah, to have a character who's like, well, I'm seeing Louise tonight, and then I'm seeing Marcy tomorrow, and then I'm seeing Ted. And someone's like, you sound busy, and the superhero's like, yeah, but we handle it. And that's it.
Well, until you can sell copies, like until you can make that an event book, like Colossus is poly. Like I got the issue where Colossus said he was poly. Like that, when we can get there, then all the publishers will do it. But people have their arms up.
Okay, I really just want to ask, so the question I also have, which you can all in the audience think about is, so in addition to Colossus as a poly character and Colossus is, oh my God, no, that would be so great. What is your like wish list of like what you would love? Like a queer superhero that you're like, I want this queer, or I want this take on gender in a superhero. What is like the thing that you're like, we do not have this and we need this? Yes.
I want by Moon Knight.
By
Moon Knight.
All right.
Because he's a severely mentally ill individual.
Okay.
Dissociative identity disorder, and he's Jewish. And he's going through all of this different stuff in his life, and I don't think that there's any reason why he shouldn't also have just a stable relationship. And why not with a dude? Why not with Frenchie?
Or two, right? As we've established. Right.
Why not? Just because, like, there are so many possible good intersections there that you could do, but they're not just because why? Because he's too minor, or
right.
I think that there's the interesting dynamics of just how that relationship just works when he's got so much going on, but he's sorted it all out, and there doesn't need to be any sort of drama with that because he's got other things busy, and then he can fall back on that.
Right. The stable home life of superheroes. The background issue that's just about what do you come home to? Who's there or not there tonight, Yes.
I would like to see a bisexual or polyamorous or any kind of developmentally set Batman Beyond or Spider-Man 2099 because those are set in the future.
Right. And it's the frickin' future.
Yeah. So that would be my, like, I would like to see a bisexual Terry McGinnis because it would call back to, like, the old Batman relationship with Robin and the new Batman relationship where he, like, has a bunch of kids with a bunch of different women. And then he'd be in the middle, and it's the future, so it's fine.
I have 2 points to add to this. One is I saw the Batman Lego movie, which I'm going to recommend. I really liked it. I thought it was hysterical. Also, I was like, this is the weirdest dynamic between Batman and Robin that I've ever seen. And maybe they could kind of play it up in this weird way because they're Legos. Also, there's like, I'll just say, not to give it away, but there's like intricate use of the fact that their heads are like things that you can snap onto, which has got tons of possibilities, obviously. But I thought that was really interesting. And then the other thing to your point about the future is, I don't know if anyone else is reading the Flintstones, the new DC Comics reboot of the Flintstones, which is also about prehistoric families and is probably one of the queerest, like looking into consumerism and politics and marriage and all of this stuff. But it's told about like Fred Flintstone. And actually I was telling a man who will remain nameless, and I showed him and he was like, holy fuck, Fred Flintstone is super hot. And then he went and bought it. So for all you men's out there, he's ridiculously hot in this comic. It's really odd because I hated Fred Flintstone, but I was like, he looks good. Like he's well built in this, and that's all I'm gonna say.
He does like push-ups with a dinosaur. No, I'm kidding.
No.
On top of no, he doesn't do that.
No.
What I would like to see, this is very like a small subtle thing I'd like to see, is someone like really cool, like Gambit or like whatever DC's version of a cool character is.
Don't shit
some
on DC
offense.
because you're all Marvel. Whatever.
No, I just don't think DC characters are like cool. Like, you know what I mean? Like Gambit's cool. You know what I mean?
All right.
Who wanted like what's the DC Wolverine? I don't know. But anyway, let me finish. You'll see where I'm going.
We're gonna beat him up after this.
I don't care. Like beat me up.
Only metaphorically though.
Oh, I'd rather. Anyway, whoa, safe word. But I would like to see someone cool in a big book. Just casually be like, you know, someone who identifies as straight, just casually being like, yeah, I had that gay experience, and it not being a big deal. And you know, because, like, remember that scene in Insecure when she goes on a date with that guy, and he's like, yeah, I sucked a dick once, and she dumps him because of it, like, because she suddenly can't get over the fact that he's been with a man. But that's the thing that no one talks about is I think everyone has, like, a gay experience, and it would make things so much easier if everyone just admitted it. You know, if every straight guy admitted that, like, yeah, when I was in middle school, I did a circle jerk. Like, when I came out to my dad, my sister goes, Dad, it's okay, it's okay. Like, remember when you and all those kids jerked off in Catholic school? And my dad was like, that was different. But that would just go a long way for people to understand that it's just, you know, people touching genitals and figuring things out and finding out where they fall on that spectrum. And that would be cool. And I think if Gambit did that, he'd be like, oh, mon chéri, you think I keep this pole around for just weaponizing?
Right. It's like there's a movie called Closet Monster that I think does that really well. This kind of like, you know, being open to sexuality as opposed to having a coming out scene, to have like my, I'm just going to mention it because I'm super fascinated by it, my Paul Rudd theory of how many straight men would sleep with Paul Rudd. So like maybe we could have a comic that stars Paul Rudd where Paul Rudd is also totally cool with that. Like where he's like, well, I'm mostly in a relationship with women, but you know, if the right like person comes along, I'm totally open to that. Yeah.
So one thing that occurs to me is you know, all the examples are in comics where you have, you know, healthy gay relationships, you know?
Right.
And really more queer stuff, you know, would be fun to see. So it'd be fun to, like, you know, Batman's always getting a new Robin. So maybe if Batman gets a Robin, it's a daddy boy relationship. You know? And Robin's his slave, you know. That's cool. That would be kind of interesting to see, like, you know, really go queer, you know, sort of.
Yeah.
Which, of course, you know, Wonder Woman did a long time ago, but.
I want to see that conference call that you have with the editors where you bring that up and then you're like, hello? Are you still there?
Real fast, Tim Drake Robin is cool. He was a cool dude. All right. Someone,
okay, you and then you.
I had a question for you guys because we keep talking about X-Men and characters that I would say they retroactively made gay, where they've been around for a really long time and they were like, actually, they've been gay this whole time. And I know that like DC did that with, they were like, we're going to make one of the main six gay, and it turned out to be Green Lantern, but it wasn't like Hal Jordan, they made old Green Lantern gay. And like your feelings on that versus making new actually queer characters, and if like if the representation matters enough to retroactively make characters gay, or if it's more important to be making new queer characters, even if they are super techie best friend type characters.
Oh, do you want to go?
I mean, I think I'm going to go. I think it's interesting because I think it depends how much you care about the sort of lineage of something, or you just want to see the new book. Like, I don't particularly care what version of something is. Like, I'm not the person who's like, that's old Superman, that's not new Superman. And I, for the longest time, didn't understand that there was even a thing. But to me, it's really more a matter of like the thing that I care more about is like finding writers who are really going to dig into it and write something badass than deciding who, you know, which one of the Green Lanterns it is. I do think it's really hard to introduce new characters because there is this like, you know, there's this like vortex around the existing ones. It's really hard to bring in new ones. And it really is the kind of like, you kind of have to like push it as a writer because also someone only lasts for as long as you're writing it. It's, you know, and then someone new comes along and they're like, I don't care about Dolly. And you're like, well, you're wrong, but whatever. So it is like logistically complicated working with a company like that to deal with it. But I've always been a person who in terms of comics follows writers and not characters. Like I'm mostly looking to see who's on the cover in terms of the text on the side than who the character is. I did find this advocate thing where they're like 52 gay superhero characters. And it was really odd going through because they had like I have the slide. They had like Green Lantern brackets gay. I was like, there's something really odd about that. Like this weird, I don't know. I was like, that's, I don't know, labels, you know? That's what I thought when I was going through it. And then you had a question. You had a thought?
Well, to that point, characters being made, coming out after they've been straight for 50 years.
But technically they're 20 when it happens, so right?
Yeah, but to us they've been straight more or less, but I feel like the higher profile the character is in the pantheon, even as awkward as it is when they're made to come out, the higher profile they are, the better the chance will be that they get really good stories about them. You know, we'll get a Matt Fraction Hawkeye kind of story.
Yes.
Like the Vision story, the solo series, I thought was one of the coolest things I've ever read. And I would love to have a story with that kind of depth from Marvel with queer stuff in it.
Yeah.
Starring a queer character. And that's not really going to happen with a side character.
Well, that's how I got like the conversation. Oh, sorry, I totally walked. That's how I got the conversation going. Was it wasn't Iceman. I went to the editor I work with and I was like, hey, Robert Kirkman made a huge boo-boo when he was at Marvel by killing this character Freedom Ring. And he got a lot of backlash for it. And he was like, what? I just wanted to write about a hero who like didn't make it and died. And I was like, yeah, but it's a small pull, so it's you just got to see the celluloid closet, and then you'll understand why you did wrong. And I'd gone to Marvel, and I'd been like, hey, I've been thinking about this. It's been weighing on me, and I'd kind of like to fix it for you, and I'd like to bring a new Freedom Ring. Sorry, this is like, you don't need to know this, but I was trying to take an obscure character, bring him back, and fix all the injustice that had been done to like a young gay hero trying to rise, and they were like, that's cool, but like that, like no one's gonna give a shit. Like,
yeah,
like the only people people were mad for 2 minutes and then it went away. Like, so it's as you said, you get more bang for your buck and you can do more with the visibility. But I don't like when it's never mind. I don't want to throw shade.
It is a really tricky thing because it's such a logistical thing, right? Like I remember when I was offered the Supergirl series and they're like, oh, it doesn't have to be in continuity, you can just do whatever you want. And I was like, cool, all right, awesome. And then people were like, that never happens. Like that doesn't get offered to people a lot. And I think that it is this kind of like, I have no idea what's going on in like the 4th floor. I'm only ever on like the 2nd floor of any of these buildings. And it is interesting though, because as you go up the floors, the furniture gets significantly better every floor you go up. But I think that there is this math that they're doing about how many comics they're going to sell. And I think G. Willow Wilson just really wrote after the Marvel comment about like diversity costing them sales. I mean, I think what she wrote was really true in that it is a gamble that they're taking, and they see it as this huge financial gamble to give somebody the space to write a story that isn't already proved to be popular, because that's all that's happening, right? It's like, this comic already sold, so let's just make this comic again 1 million times. And it is like a slow, it's Titanic, no, that's not the wrong word, not Titanic, it's iceberg slow to get these things to move and to take chances. And so the trick is that when you see these comics come out, when you see like, oh, there's this new character, Ms. Marvel, we should all go buy that, because that's what they're thinking no one's going to do, or it seems to be the sort of sense that it's not going to happen. Zan, do you disagree with me and you want to say something? Okay.
I was going to expand on that, what Ashley brought up about the established versus non-established, like new character versus established. I think that we have an industry that is dominated by a few companies that need to constantly reimagine and update their characters because they were created when it was all straight white dudes. And that was normal, that was like the default. So now they're updating them, and so the race has changed, the religion's changed, the sexuality has changed. I just feel like it's very natural, it's very organic to do that. And people notice it because they're like, whoa, 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 like this character was never black before.
Right.
Never gay before. But the reason they weren't is not a good enough reason.
Right.
And so for me, it's like, I can see why it feels better as a fan to have a new character that you don't already have a long history with and have preconceptions about. But in terms of the company, it makes absolute perfect sense.
Sure.
To do that as a good core change for the company, for their roster?
Well, and conflict comes with change, right? Like people push back when things are different. And I think that it is interesting to note, I read one Facebook feed about this Marvel article that came out and regretted it instantly. But someone did write, like, it's not like these characters haven't changed hands. It's not like Thor hasn't been different people. It's not like Batman hasn't been different people. Yeah. The thing that you're freaking out about is that Thor is a woman, or that that Iron Man isn't white anymore. So yeah, change requires, some adjustment. And also, again, it's just about hiring great writers, right? Like, it's also a possibility that you don't like that writer, as opposed to, that you don't like, the change that you're seeing.
I kind of have a theory that we're headed into a different way of doing the comics, and that's why Marvel is doing so many kind of legacy versions, is that it's not going to be about Steve Rogers' Captain America as much anymore. It's going to be about Captain America as a job or as a title.
It is a job.
Well,
yeah, man.
Well, just like in real life. Like
Yeah.
You have like people who are firemen and policemen and whatever. They police people.
Police people. Well done.
And that opens you up to be able to tell a lot more stories.
It does.
The same ideas and the same concepts and powers and things, but have it. You don't have to constantly retcon everything and change Peter Parker to a high school student again. And
Right.
all that stuff, because it's more about a legacy of comics.
Well, and the power of these stories is in the specificity, right? The power of these stories is always in who that character is, and having that character be a distinct person that you can relate to. That's what you're relating to, is the story, ideally. Yeah, and I think it's also, it's interesting because the industry is changing so much. Like, the fact that I'm writing for this industry, I think suggests that like some things have changed, because maybe that's egotistical. I think it means it's changed.
It's an interesting kind of challenge, because on the one side there's like, the industry needing to keep their audience level.
Yeah.
Which is always in great danger in comics. As an economic venture. And on the other side is the energy and excitement of doing new things. As we were talking, I was imagining a Batman story, and imagining that. So in traditional Batman, going back to the Golden Age and stuff, and Superman, one of the tropes was they're always keeping women at a distance. Superman's always pushing Lois Lane away, Batman is pushing Vicky Vale away, And what was going on, of course, was this was assumed to be a boys' fantasy story, and girls would just be messy, But it would be interesting if someone would do a story in which, the reason Batman was always pushing women away is because he's gay. And he finally comes to terms with that. But that would be so shocking.
Right.
And you couldn't do that, so you could have some alternative universe version kind of thing.
Right.
But it's always this contest between what's really exciting to do as innovation and what's safe to do.
Right.
And I can understand their position, the companies.
Sure.
Because their economic structure is somewhat fragile,
Right, but as you said, like, our social context changes, and so the stories we tell changes. Like, it's obviously, like, the idea of consequence has become a much bigger theme in superhero comics, and the idea of, like, the whole, Avengers storyline is that all these people are like, yeah, when you blew up that building, my mom was in that building, thanks a lot. So I think that the idea of the sort of larger consequences of anybody's actions is something that is a very current storyline, and so that's leaking into superhero stories as well. And I think the sort of general demeanor of superheroes has changed, because they used to be much more standoffish, right? They used to be much more like, you're welcome, I'll see you later. Then they're like gone. And it was funny because I know I keep mentioning movies because that's how I can be, that's the thing that sticks in my head. But I was really fascinated by the Batman Lego movie because it really was like this portrait of, I loved it. I thought it was so great. I don't know if anybody else in the theater thought it was great. I loved it. But
little kids act as my beard.
But I love the idea of like Batman's this rich guy, but he's alone and he's lonely. And the idea of lonely Batman, like not just like sort of like, like Humphrey Bogart lonely Batman, but like something more complicated and like, young lonely Batman. I thought that's fantastic, and I love that's part of the story.
I know you have your hand. Do you mind if I? Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, who cares about me?
Okay. Well, actually, my question goes back to your point about changing storylines to establish old characters versus that's, I think, what was really successful in Ultimate Spider-Man.
That's what I was going to talk about.
Yeah.
I was
Like,
gonna-
to Miles Morales instead of Peter Parker, but instead of, like, that's why current diversity in Marvel isn't really working, because they don't have the established storylines to make it work. They're just sort of like, now Thor's a lady, and now Falcon is Captain America, without actually doing the work. And I just wanted to see how you guys felt.
I was going to actually say out loud and see if everyone agrees. That was going to be my question to everyone. But I kind of like that method where they go, okay, it's just going to be too much trouble to out of nowhere make Peter Parker black. But we already have this like alternative universe, and let's F around with it and just do whatever because sales are there and we can just do it, and Brian Bendis is writing it and people will buy it. And then it gets so popular, like the Sam Jackson, Nick Fury, that they go, oh, this is so dope, we just need to make it canon. Because then Miles got so popular that they brought him, right? He's in the, yeah. Because I didn't, and Grant Morrison did make Batman or Superman gay in some weird event book for like 4 pages, like in an Elseworlds thing. But
if he did, this audience can confirm it. Someone in this audience can confirm that's true.
But I do kind of dig that, where they find, the publisher finds their safe way to let us do what we do best, which is create, you know, narratives that last. And then if they do last, like with an audience, and that they stick, then they go, okay, let's make it part of the continuity, and you know, you can have that Spider-Man, but here's this other really cool Spider-Man with a cooler costume.
Like without that established work, it's sort of like back in the old time comics. They were like, what if this happens, or oh, that spell turned me into a lady, and it's not the same thing.
But I think you can kind of do anything if you have the, maybe this is, I mean, I think if you have the right team, you can kind of do whatever you want. I think if you have the right person and you have a little bit of allowance to do something, then you can kind of set up whatever you want and people will read it. Like I have this faith in, you know, in good comics, that a good comic is a good comic. And even if you're like, how's this guy this thing, that there's maybe like 5 other people who are like, I don't care, it's super cool. Like I just think it's really funny and I'm going to read it and it's awesome. But I feel like that is like this, it is the complexity of the nerddom we're working in, right? Where it's like everybody can like cross-section quote all these different comics that like came like 10 years before, even if you're only like 15, you can do that somehow. But also that it's sort of, you know, I mean, I'm not like, I don't come from a comic fandom, so I'm always sort of surprised when like someone tweeted something when Supergirl came out where they were like, you know, you're not making any fans by constantly, you know, messing with your characters and creating new stories. And I was like, really, why not? That sounds awesome to me. That sounds what you should be doing. You should be like, let's just bring in, I mean, you know, it's like maybe why other publishers are just like, yeah, let's just do whatever we want. Like we don't have to worry about it. I just want us all to get along. That's all I'm really saying. We have time for one more question. Gord, do you have a question?
I do, because I want to know, are there any queer superheroes or sidekicks that you would like to throw back that you wish had never actually been?
Like removed from the ship coldly?
Yeah, wait, what was that? The Rawhide Kid or something? You liked that? I thought it was a little too loud. Like, okay. Agree to disagree, but that one I was kind of like, oh, this feels like a minstrel, sorta. Like I would have rather something different. That was
The tamest Max book ever.
Oh.
The other thing about the Rawhide Kid was that nobody got it. You know, here's this, you know, absolute flaming queen, and all these people, because he's a gunfighter, you know, they assume he has to be manly.
Right.
You know, and he's like totally flaming, and they just don't notice. I just thought the comic was hilarious, actually.
I'm into it. I mean, it's the one I picked, though. If I had to pick one.
All right. We all get to pick one and nobody gets it. You're allowed to pick your thing. Do you have one?
You know, I have to say, this line of questions that we've had, the last few, they confuse me, not because I don't think they're good questions, but because, like, I just don't care at some level about, you know what I mean? Like, I just don't care, like, I don't relate to my media in terms of identification. So like the question you asked earlier, you were saying like, what aspiration do you have? Like basically, what do you wish was represented in terms of queerness? And I'm like, I don't know, I wanna be surprised. Just like represent like more shit in the world, like stuff. So like, I don't have in mind the idea of like, I wanna see this thing. Actually, if there's anything I wanna see gay people arguing in comics.
That's
like
a wish.
about their, you know, like, yes,
Yes.
that would be aspirational, but it's like, there aren't specific characters I love or hate. It's more like I just want more of them, which many of us have been saying. But I don't need them to conform to any like fantasy or ideal I have. I want to be surprised about how I might relate to things that have nothing to do with me.
Yes.
At all times. I was saying at lunch today, like, I'm a scholar of popular culture, and I think I can name 1 or 2 objects of popular culture in my entire 33 years where I looked at it and I was like, oh, that person is so like me. Like when I watched Glee for the first time, the character that Chris Colfer plays shocked me because his voice was so high. And I was like, wow, I didn't know anybody when I was younger who had like my voice. And the fact that he's heroic in the story, it was powerful to me. But other than that, I'm just like, I don't need to see myself in any of those stories. So there's none of them that make me mad enough that I want to throw them back. Like I just don't, I'm like, I'm fine. Like just produce more. Like tell me more things and give me more people, and that will intrigue me.
I do have a dream issue that's just 2 gay superhero characters fighting the whole time. Like they're supposed to be doing superhero stuff and they just cannot agree. Like they're in the car and someone's like, I just want to really play Madonna, and this other character's like, you are not playing Madonna. I'm so fucking sick of that. So every time they're trying to do something super, they're like disagreeing about like their representation or something, or like some petty thing. I'm gonna go write that. That would be super fun. Okay, you guys, that's 6 o'clock. That's like our hour and a half of geeking out on superheroes. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you.